Today on the EOR podcast, I sit down with Peter Bissonnette, the former president of Shaw Communications and a true Canadian business legend. From leading billion-dollar growth to championing mental wellness in the workplace, Peter brings powerful insight into leadership, legacy, and living with purpose. Trust me, you'll want to take notes on this one. Peter Bissonnette, welcome to the EOR podcast. Let's go. 3, 2, 1. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the EOR podcast. I'm your host, Quinn Magnuson. Today, I have a very special guest. When we talk about the history of communications television in Canada, the number one name that will probably come up in everybody's mind is Shaw Cable Systems or Shaw TV. Today on the show, I have the former CEO of Shaw Cable Systems, Peter Bissonnette. Peter, welcome to the show. I want to start here. When we talk about being the CEO of one of Canada's largest, most well-known corporations, organizations, but your path began in the Air Force, and interesting, in the Air Force and in BC Tel. So how did those early roles? Let's start with the Air Force. How did the early roles in the Air Force shape your leadership style when you came to Shaw?
Well, actually, there was even a stage before the Air Force, and that was 4 years in the Benedictine monastery.
Let's talk about that then. That's interesting.
In Mission, BC, there was a Benedictine monastery called Christ the King. And I was going to school in North Vancouver, and my parish priest at the time was also my basketball coach, and he convinced me that maybe I have a vocation. And I thought, well, what a great life he has. He coaches basketball. I love sports. Competitive sports have always been a part of my makeup. And so I actually went to the seminary in Mission. It was a Benedictine seminary. It was almost a cloistered kind of environment. And I find that is, when you're looking at life's experiences really create who we are, that was really kind of a foundational exercise for me in terms of learning a little discipline, understanding, that there is a spiritual side to this world, and sometimes things happen, you don't know why. It could be as a result of prayers, or it could be intercessions or whatever. But to the extent that I realized I didn't want to be a priest after 4 years. Those vocations are very special. And so I actually went from the seminary with a little bridging moment in Ottawa at a high school, and I joined the Air Force. And the Air Force was a continuum, if you will, of developing I'll call it my foundation for life. And it was discipline, but it was also really important for me to set the seed, if you will, for constant learning. I wanted to learn. I became a radar technician air. And in order to be a radar technician air, you had to have a certain acumen. And I was blessed that I had a propensity, if you will, for all things electronic. And so they invested in me, and I was rewarded with a fabulous trade. I became a radar technician. I was in that Air Force base in Clinton, Ontario, and then Camp Borden, Ontario for advanced radar training. And then ultimately my first real job was in Trenton, Ontario, which was the Transport Command headquarters for the Air Force. And I worked in the avionics department there, working on radar systems, radar air. And even while I was there, I pursued, anytime there was an opportunity for more development and training, I got it. And so my time in the Air Force is really all about starting to essentially provide for the needs that I really thought I saw, but I didn't see them as clearly as I later on did. But the need to really be able to function in the real world. And the real world, I didn't think was the Air Force. I thought it was outside of the Air Force, because the Air Force is somewhat protective. You're on an Air Force base. You have a life you live. I mean, mine was basically working and exercising and focusing on how I could become better. So the Air Force was a wonderful time for me to take the opportunity to learn. And so I became a very proficient radar technician. But I realized in 1968, in 67, I transferred from Trenton to Rivers, Manitoba. And being a prairie boy, and there's an allure to the prairies, but there's also a very different kind of lifestyle when you're living in the middle of when you're living in the middle of the prairies. And we were just about 100 miles from Winnipeg, colder than heck during the winter, and working outside on some of the jets that the Air Force had at Rivers, Manitoba before that base closed. So again, I worked on specific radar systems there, but I realized that when an opportunity came and the Air Force was downsizing, the opportunity to maybe get more education. So I thought, I still don't have a formal educational background. It was kind of a spotted dog, if you will. And so I had an opportunity to leave the Air Force with an honorary discharge. And I actually drove from Rivers, Manitoba to Ottawa to pursue whatever the next stage of my life was. This was the first taste I really had of how important what we had done previously was in my life. That I actually got a job working in Ottawa in a manufacturing company, manufacturing electronics, telecommunications equipment for CN and CP, the national railway companies.
Yeah.
And this we're now in 1969, and I remember contributing some sort of innovative ideas to the quality control processes in that company, Northern Radio. But I asked the person that was my boss, I said, so tell me, what are the prospects for, if I look down the road 5 years or 10 years, what are my prospects doing what I'm doing in Ottawa? He said, well, you'll still be making $2.50 an hour, and we'll love you for doing what you do here, but that's about it. And I said, holy doodle, that doesn't sound like something that I want to spend my life doing and trying to achieve for and build for. And so I made a really conscious decision to move on and to look for something that really satisfied my need for growth and my personal growth. And so I had $50 in my wallet. I bought a ticket on the Greyhound bus in Ottawa, and 4 days later, I ended up in Vancouver. I had no job, but within about a month, I was fortunate to be hired by BC Telephone. My uncle Peter, who was a fashion designer from England, he let me stay at his house in Vancouver. He had just designed the wedding trousseau for Margaret Trudeau, or Margaret Sinclair, who ultimately married the Prime Minister of Canada. And so my career started to take a bit more shape, and I started to take really seriously that, I'm now, at that time I was, I think, 23 years old, and I started looking at ways that I could start to build upon the foundations that I had from the seminary and from the Air Force. And so at BC Tel, I was hired again for my electronics background. And again, I started off at I'll call it the bare bottom. I was a toll switchman. We were working on step-by-step analog equipment. But I also recognized that the importance of customer focus and the importance of telephone calls in those days were really meaningful, ways of expressing and communicating. But there was no internet. There was 4 or 5 off-air channels available. There was no cable television. The world was an oyster, frankly, for me. So I worked for 13 years at BC Tel, and I progressed from being a toll switchman. I was fortunate. I had a mentor, Tom Porteous, who, life's lessons. And, my book, Count on Me, is all about life's lessons and finding mentors, and then ultimately pay it back by being mentors yourself. So Tom Porteous saw something in me that I don't think I even saw myself. And he said to me one day, how would you like to come and work for me? I've heard that you're a hard worker. And I said, wow, I'd love to, because he was somebody that everybody looked up to as being, if you could work for Tom Porteous, you're working for somebody who really cared, who gave you the kind of feedback and direction that we all need in those kind of youthful moments that we have. He was also a bit of a dynamic sports person, and somebody I really looked up to. And so he took me under his wing, if you will. And one of the things that I said to him was, Tom, I will never forget you. I will never let you down. You can count on me. So I don't know if that's kind of a thumbnail anyway, getting me to the top of the company.
That is I can't remember what you called it, but it's a very varied journey. And what I love about that journey, Peter, is the fact that something that I preach to people about, when it comes to goal setting, or when it comes to reaching where they, how do I explain this? if I were to have said to you when you were 16 years old, Peter, and I would have said you're going to become the CEO of one of the largest corporations in Canada in telecommunications, you probably would have laughed and been like, yeah, whatever. And just the fact that you originally had this plan to go into the Benedictine monastery. Okay, so it's like, okay, that's not the life for me. So now I'm going to go into the military, which seems like kind of the opposite end of. And then you end up at BC Tel, and that starts to shape, kind of the path and ultimately, into Shaw. And we're going to get into a little more of that journey as well. But it goes to show that, when you just, and what we preach here at Effort Over Results is that when you just put efforts towards things that you love and have a passion for and take opportunities that present themselves in the moment, you head towards a direction, not necessarily a specific North Star, because we don't know what's going to be placed in front of us. We don't know what's going to detour us. We don't know what opportunities, are going to be out there 1 year from now, 5 years from now, what have you. My journey is the same. I was CFL football player, then I went back to school to get my teaching degree, then I was a teacher, and then a business owner, and then it basically just speaks to putting efforts into things that you love and the opportunities that are presented to you, seeing what works and what doesn't work. And ultimately you kind of end up on a path to, bigger and better things. And that's what it sounds like, kind of what your life, like we could unpack that entire 30-40 year journey from, teenager going into, you potentially going to the monastery to ultimately being the CEO of Shaw. So that's a fantastic story. And what I want my audience to get out of that, and young people especially, those ones that are, maybe in college right now or in high school, is if you're stressing about what you think you should be doing after college, after university, or like, what am I going to do? I'm not sure what my, take a deep breath, keep putting one foot in front of the other towards things that you like, things that you're interested in, whatever, and then kind of let the universe figure it out. And I will always say, God has a plan for you. I mean, not everybody is Christian based or faith based, but really it is just keep putting in the effort towards things, be directionally correct, not absolutely correct. Does that sound about right?
It does. And let me just clarify one thing, Quinn.
Yeah.
I was the president of Shaw Communications. The CEO was Jim Shaw, and Jim and I worked together for many
Okay.
years until his passing.
Thank you for that. Yeah.
And so I just want to make, I was, first of all, you're absolutely right. Is one step, another step, and who knows where these steps are taking you. But there's a direction and there's a purpose, and they don't. They sometimes they become clearer to you with the passing of time, with opportunities. But so many people used to say, well, I'd like the company to train me to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And I absolutely don't agree with that. I've always been a proponent of taking responsibility for your own development and training. And when there's opportunities to improve yourself, to take advantage of that. And so that my life is an example of that. And you talked about the young people. One of the things and one of the reasons that I wrote my book was to really, I have had a diverse career, and there's so many things that have occurred to me in that diverse career. There's challenges, there's paths that we don't necessarily expect to happen, but we take advantage of those when we do. It was frankly all about relationships, and I guess the ultimate for me, the ultimate experience for me was J.R. Shaw, and the example. He was the founder of Shaw. He was a man of the people. He was a we person. Teams are built of we's, not I's. And the values that he espoused were values that I felt really comfortable with. They felt like my family, and they felt like family. And so as I look back now on my career and the feedback that I've had from employees that have worked with us, and when we were Shaw, when I started in '89, only had 20 channels. There was no internet. There was no telephone systems that were being provided by cable people. There was just the beginnings of cellular phone, because I was at Rogers for 5 years before Shaw. Okay. And George Fuhrheller had basically worked with Ted Rogers in launching that. But Shaw was all about his people and roles and responsibilities. And JR, as the founder, used to say, don't shine the light on yourself. Your role is to shine the light on somebody else and be advocates for each other. When you played football, and you know that it's a teamless sport. And if everybody does what they're supposed to do, and they all have roles and responsibilities, if everybody actually executes on that, wow, you can have an unbelievable experience. You might not win all your games, but just the joy that you take from being a part of a team and doing what you did and doing it as best as you can, that's how I kind of summarized my time at Shaw. It was experiential. There's a legacy that came from that. There was a way of being that I think that some of the things that you talk about is in terms of effort versus results. The effort is actually where the sort of humanity of it all comes. Yep. In terms of fit. When one of the most important parts about a company, that when we were looking for people to become a part of our team, was how do they fit? What's their makeup? What's their personal makeup? Do they have a good work ethic? Can they communicate? And so I just want to acknowledge, first of all, that JR, he set the tone for so many families. He used to say, if I could put smiles on the faces of my employees, that would give me all of the joy that founding a company can give to you. Families who can actually make their living working, within an industry where people actually matter, where people care, where customers care, and where shareholders are rewarded from it. You talk about the effort over results. Yeah. The results are all about shareholders as well. So anyway, I jumped to Shaw.
That's okay.
The uniqueness of it was the people side of it. Letters from and comments from employees that used to work with me at Shaw. One lady, she said, "I just read your book, Peter," and her husband had just told her about 3 weeks before that he was leaving her, and she was broken and heartbroken. And she said, "I read your book, and I photographed pages where there were challenges that you were presented with, and the way that you handle those challenges." And she worked with me. She was the vice president of marketing, so we had a good idea of how we work. But just to hear the feedback that I got from her and many other employees made the effort to write this book with Lucy and myself for 3 years of our lives, made it all worthwhile to get that kind of feedback. And so my goal in writing this book was to say, how can I help young people that are setting out on their own path? What diverse things that happen in my path can they learn from? More than just diversity, how can I relate to people? What would be my way of being? As a football player, you have to smash at people once in a while. There's a certain kindness to it all, but there's also a task that we have to follow. And so I call it the chameleon. If you can be a chameleon, you relate to any number of people in a certain way, in a way that they could look you in the face and they feel, some kind of bond and some kind of purpose. And as a leader, if you have followers that really trust and believe in you, and they believe that you're leading for the right reasons, that this isn't all about you, it's about the team and how we succeed together in a non-sports kind of environment. Shaw was as close to that as I could be.
So I want to ask you a question, Peter. And I'm jumping ahead to a question I would normally ask towards the end of the show, but I'm going to ask it now. What advice do you give? Because what I have seen with Generation Z, okay, so Gen Z, so you and I are Gen X and Boomer, but Gen Z, all these Gen X and Boomer business owners say there's a Gen Z problem, that they have no work ethic, that they don't want to stay anywhere for very long, they're not loyal. But they grew up in a different environment, and they grew up with Gen X parents that basically helicoptered parent them their entire childhood. They kept being told, given participation medals, and kept being told how great they were, even though they'd accomplished nothing. And this is kind of where a little bit of the effort over results mentality comes in. It's like, just put the work in and let things, kind of play themselves out. But what advice would you give the Gen Z 18 to 27-year-olds that are, coming out of high school, going to university, or maybe even in university now, and they're a bit unsure as to what the world holds for them after university? Because the majority of university degrees that are obtained by young people don't get them a job. It really just proves that they can finish something. I mean, sure, if you're an engineer, you're in medicine, you're in law, I get it, that's fine. But I'm saying for the most degrees, it really doesn't do anything other than just get you a piece of paper on the wall. So what do you tell those Gen Z graduates If you were giving a commencement speech at a university, maybe you've done that, I don't know. What do you tell them right now, considering the way the world is in 2025 and their anxiety and sort of their hesitation to like, what do I do? You know, what's next for me?
Well, it's a great question, and Gen Z, baby boomers, all the, our company, the Shaw, was made up of every generation.
Yeah.
The baby boomers were kind of taking their role in it, but I watched dynamic, driven, uh, well-behaved, focused people who were actually trying to achieve something. The same, Maslow's laws of, the basics.
Hierarchy of needs.
Those were just as applicable to them, frankly.
Yeah.
And so, to the extent that we could provide them with a role in a company that had meaning to them, where there was opportunities for them to take their own particular skill set, whether they were an accountant or an engineer or an IT person, having an understanding of what the company was all about in terms of what our objectives were, where we were trying to go, what we were trying to do. And that really came down to a role that we had in ensuring that they understood what we were doing in a very clear way. And then where they could feel that they could make a life. That's the hardest thing I had when I was youthful. You could probably call me a Gen Z at the baby boomers, was really understanding, is this really what I want to do? And what made it actually something I wanted to do was the mentors that I ran into, people that through their own example demonstrated to me that, wow, could be a place where I could spend my life, where I can achieve, where there is opportunity to grow, where there's fairness in terms of compensation, where you're treated with respect, where you're given opportunities, where you're given clear directions, where you feel a part of something, where you're encouraged to advocate for each other. This isn't about bumping heads, running to the light. This is about advocacy. And so I'll call it sort of an enlightened workplace. If you can find that, my goodness, then it becomes really up to yourself to make the best of that. How do you do that? In the way you communicate, in the way that you relate to other people. Very simple tenets. I talk about the golden rule, and my word is my bond. Very simple kind of values. If you say you're going to do something, do it. How reliable are you? I mean, you can imagine that being a quarterback and the guy says, the running back says, don't worry, I've got him. And the guy blows right through him and takes the head off the quarterback. There was a mixed message there. And
There's a trust issue.
Very much so. So trust is a huge part of it. So having values that you can live that feel intrinsic to the way you are, and those are acquired through experiences, being able to manage failure and make good things out of failure, take good things out of failure, sharing in your vulnerabilities in terms of asking for help. How do I do this? I mean, I used to say to people that I used to work with, you have my permission that if there's something I'm doing that's having a negative impact on you, you have my permission to let me know. We do it obviously in a kind way, but so how can we help each other to be better? And in a work environment, that's a powerful thing. And so just as powerful today as it is 20 years ago and 30 years ago. One of the things that I used to speak to our employees, I used to love doing it. These were sort of just off the cuff kinds of messages. But one of them, that I've learned through my career has been A talking to B about C. And when you have A talking to B about C, I call that a kind of a cancerous kind of negative. It creates doubt. It creates distrust. It creates, a foundation that you can't build a company on it. So encouraging A to talk to C if there's an issue that you want to deal with, not A to B to C. So people in our company go, wow, ABC, that's such a simple thing to think about. And when you find yourself doing it, if the other person, B in the algorithm, says, you know what, maybe you should talk to him about that or her about that, rather than me. And if you actually have the discipline to do that, that's a huge way of creating trusting working environments. And so the way you relate, the way also having the ability to actually see yourself in the future. Where am I? Like physically see yourself, and to be able to paint the picture for yourself. I mean, I've seen people that I've had the pleasure of mentoring who were young engineers coming into the company, and who just with the confidence, knowing that we had confidence in them, was a unbelievably reinforcing kind of process that made them feel like this is the place I want to be. They actually respect me. They cherish me. They value me. And so those looking for the right fit for you in an organization is a part of also the sort of the maturation process. But making sure that you do everything you can to make yourself ready for it. You put on your uniform. We used to go, oh my God, I wake up in the morning, I feel fantastic today about working for this company. I feel like there's a purpose in life. And so just doing things with passion. I studied music for many, many years. I studied photography, finding ways that kind of create joy for yourself. There are peaceful moments as well, but being able to speak left brain, right brain. If you're an accountant, for instance, people go, oh, accountants, they're kind of dry as toast. They aren't dry as toast. I mean, if you seek to find the other kind of dimensions within people, look for the good things in people, you'll find them. I mean, some people, oh, that guy he's always on his own, and people kind of, well, if you engage in them and you bring them into the conversation, if you look for the good in people, you will absolutely find it.
Yeah. Man, so many great questions I have for what you just said there. I'm going to unpack a few of those things. One thing, your leadership style, and bear with me when I get through two or three of these points, but your leadership style was ahead of its game. And what I mean by that, Peter, is it seems to me that the command and control dictatorship type leader that basically, do as I say, follow the rules or you're fired. The kind of culture you and I almost grew up with, in the 60s, 70s, 80s. It started to shift a little bit in the 90s, and then obviously it's definitely shifted in the 2000s. But that command and control leadership just doesn't work today. Or at least it's not sustainable. It might drive results, but those results aren't sustainable and they don't last very long. The way you described the culture that you developed at Shaw, that obviously was started by J.R. Shaw, and the culture that was at Shaw Communications was sort of pioneering what today's work environment really should be. It was psychologically safe. It was a place where people felt good to come to work. They felt like they had some purpose. They want to link purpose to paycheck. And I love hearing that from you, because you very easily could have been the command control type leader back when you got to Shaw, but you chose not to, and you were ahead of your game that way. The other thing that you had said was about communications, and I've always said to young people, even when I was a teacher teaching high school 20 years ago, I said, if you're good with people and you communicate well, you'll always have a job and you'll always have a chance of being successful. Always. I think those are the two key personal traits and personal skills that everybody needs to develop, is learn how to be around people and be good with people, and help, not sell, like look to help people, but then also be a good communicator. And that takes time, that takes skill. And I realize some people are introverts and maybe they don't communicate as well, but I think those two things are very important. So I want to go back then to that culture at Shaw. So you got there in 89, I believe, as VP of operations, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. And what was Shaw like in the early days? Because my view on Shaw Cable Systems, Shaw Communications, growing up, because we had cable TV, we had Shaw Cable, from a young age, was like sort of this big faceless corporation in Calgary, that kind of controlled TV, right, when I was growing up. So when you're explaining to me what JR created and then what you were able to carry through in the culture you created, it kind of blows that philosophy up of really what a large organization really looks like. So let's talk about the early days at Shaw, the culture that JR created, what you saw in him as a leader, and then what you tried to carry over into your leadership at Shaw.
That's casting my first of all, when I started at Shaw, JR was the CEO.
Yep.
Jim Shaw, his oldest son, was the senior vice president of operations, and Jim was, and Brad Shaw was just coming into the industry. In fact, Brad worked with me for 20 years before he became the CEO, and so the chain carried on. So in '89, we had 20 channels, and it was a family organization. JR said to me, and Jim said to me, we want you to help us to grow this company. And at the time, We were basically in Edmonton, and we had a few systems in British Columbia. We were in Kelowna, where I am right now, and we had a system in White Rock. And so at that time, Rogers were the biggest cable company, and they were growing through acquisitions. They wanted to, they were growing in Toronto. So we had started, and part of the successful acquisition process was just the way that JR was. I mean, the families, you can imagine if you had a family company and you were looking to get out of the business, but you wanted to make sure that your legacy was also preserved, who would you choose to buy your company? And so JR was just a master. He was such a gentleman. And when he put his hand out and said, we're going to take care of you and your company and everything else, and you got that big, beefy Alberta shake from a JR, he was also a cattleman. His word was his bond, and that was such an important aspect of what he was. So he said, we're going to grow the company, and we want to start to add. Technological change was hitting us. Again, we only had 20 channels, but digital networks were happening with the Much Music and TSN and all those services.
Yeah.
And we were able to package more services. The CRTC, because we were a regulated company, we had to do things properly with the regulator. We were able to also start adding more and more U.S. services. The technologies now which we were building were enabling us to add more and more services. And so there was a whole host of technological changes taking place. The company was, and then in 1995, we started looking at the internet. Our companies, the need for resources became ever more important. So we were looking at our back office systems for one. How can we manage these products so that our customers have the easiest time dealing with us, whether it's on the phones, whether it's in the house when our technicians go in there. So customer focus became critical. Answering our phone calls became critical. I think the face that JR used to say, our customers, our employees, and our shareholders, those are the people that we have to, so customers and employees were almost first, he said. If you treat your customers like you treat your employees and vice versa, if we have some values that we all share, caring, integrity, customer focus, those became the values that were posted on our walls. Accountability, my book, Count on Me. Accountability was a huge one. So focusing on customers, we actually, through the efforts of Jim Shaw and Brad, later on, and JR, we grew from a company that had $100 million in revenue in 1989 with about 100, maybe 400 employees to, when I left the company in 2015, I was still on the board, $5 billion company with over 3 million customers, both internet and products. So growing also was a huge process in terms of making sure we're growing in the right way, that we're attracting people that share the same values as us. And so one of the things that you talk about, how we develop our styles in the monastery, I used to think about, they used to point to the Good Shepherd and how he treats people. And I remember in some of the experiences that I had earlier on in my career, I said, wow, if I was ever in a position to lead, I would never, ever treat somebody like this or like that. In the way that I'd be treated. And so that actually carried through to me. I saw the opportunity to be the Good Shepherd. The shepherd's out there, he's protecting the flock. He's making sure they can work in a secure environment, that their interests are looked after and there's no coyotes and nothing bad's going to happen to them. I carried that through as my count on me, the protector, if you will, to ensure that if you're working in an engineering group and you're a lady amongst 14 men and there's things that might be going on in terms of the way that you're being treated, the way that you're being accepted, that became, as a leader, my responsibility to ensure that we felt safe working for our company, and that we didn't just say we were this, we walked the walk, we talked the talk, we took care of things the way we should have taken care of things. We treated people. When I moved to Toronto in 1995, we had actually more employees in the new systems that we bought in Ontario to what we already had in our company. And so integrating values and culture was a huge part of my energy, was making people in Vaughan and Richmond Hill, in Saskatoon, when we bought from Clint, he used to own the company in Saskatoon, when we bought from them, we wanted to make sure that the employees felt as good about being a part of Shaw as we felt about them being a part of Shaw. And so that took a great deal of effort. Bill McDonald, our HR person, he used to teach Shaw U. And Shaw U was not just about learning how cable goes from one home to the other. It was how we worked with each other. What are the important aspects of the company? Understanding the history of the company, understanding where we were going. And so there was a great deal of effort, I'll call it, on being ambassadors to Shaw, ambassadors of our values. And so when the chairman of a company, the founder of the company says, shine the light on each other, advocate for each other, wow, what pop, and talks about what we were trying to do as a company, and was confident in the industry to the extent that we were investing millions and millions of dollars to build services that customers could enjoy and treating customers the same way we treated each other. All of that soft, I'll call it the secret sauce of Shaw, it has an impact. It had an impact on customers. One of the truly wonderful things that we did is in Saskatoon, we had a call center. In Winnipeg, we had a call center. In Toronto, we had call centers. In Vancouver, we didn't go overseas. We had employees working in our call centers who actually lived within the communities. So they felt a part of it. They knew what our services were. They knew where the roads were in Saskatoon or in Vancouver or wherever. They knew what the communities were. And so we felt a part of the community. And that was a conscious decision of JR's to ensure that anybody that our customers were calling people who were Shaw and living in Shaw. And they could talk about the Riders and how they beat the Lions up last weekend, whatever it is. But they felt connected to it. And so that created also, as you talk about Gen Zers, they go, wow, this company really does care for us. They demonstrate it every day, the way that they compensate us, the way they treat us, the people that we get to work with who are, similarly motivated, the way that they provide for engagement was a wonderful thing. When we did to have engaged employees, the more engagement, the better. Well, I remember we did an engagement survey, a 360 look at ourselves, and I think when our first one, we were maybe 62 or 63% engaged, and we said, wow, so that means that 37% of our employees aren't engaged. How do we change that around? Because customer service was becoming the differentiator between competing interests. And so how do you provide that? You provide it by having people that are talking to our customers who care and who are engaged. And so we spend a lot of time focusing on that kind of feedback loop, if you will. How are our customers feeling? How are our employees feeling? And we moved our engagement over, I think, 4 or 5 years from the 62 up to 84%, which is, in the industry, having 84% of your employees engaged creates a tremendous workforce. So that all came from the need for family values, the competitive nature, if you will, of treating customers like we care, which we did. And I can give you all sorts of examples of how we showed that. When we used to phone customers every week, I'd get 10 or 15 customers. I would phone them and say, how did we do today? Is there anything we could have done better? This is Peter Bissonnette. I'm the president of Shaw Communications. And they go, holy doodle. And we would actually document if there were things that didn't go right or did go right. We would make sure that it was noted and that we did something about it. And that permeates through the whole organization.
Hey everyone, I'm your host, Quinn Magnuson. Welcome to the EOR podcast, the show for leaders, high performers, and the secrets to grit, growth, and greatness. I want to ask you something. Are you an organization looking to build a rock-solid strategy that will grow your people and end up in increased productivity and profitability? Then I invite you to start by going over to our website, effortoverresults.com, and book your free strategy call directly with me. No obligation, just a friendly one-to-one call so I can learn more about you and your team goals. So if you're ready to get real, go over to effortoverresults.com, book your free call today. And now let's get back to the show.
When you're a technician, we didn't have contractors working for us. We had our own people because we the algorithm for us is if you work for us, you'll care more than somebody who's a contractor that may not have the same kind of drive or the same kind of vision. So everything we did was kind of concentric to satisfying customers. And then the other stuff, I know you have, effort over results. The other stuff actually translates in almost a miraculous way. When we launched the internet, in North America, we were the fastest growing provider of internet because we had scaled the business, the capability of our business to provide the kind of infrastructure you need to sell a fast, high-speed internet. Customers appreciated the way that we provided the services to them. If we said we were going to be there, we had a period where we said 2-hour service calls. So if you call us now, we're going to be out there in 2 hours. And we used to bump our heads as well, but we every time we would learn from it because we'd ask each other, how are we doing? We'd ask our customers. So that was driven by good business kind of needs, but it would also, good business has kind of commonalities. Good employees who care, employees who feel satisfied with all of the aspects of their employment, and they're seeing promotions from within. They're seeing compensation from within. They're reading good stories about the company in the press. That we have a community programming departments that are another way of sort of outreach to our communities, where we have a channel that's basically a dedicated channel to express ourselves with, in terms of our community, that the community actually matters. And that was a huge differentiator too, when we were looking at the way that we can demonstrate that enduring relationships with customers actually means something to us. And so I've kind of painted another thumbnail for you, but having real life values that you live and you manifest, those are what we think made the difference in why Shaw was able to grow, but still maintain the same values.
What I heard through the things that really stuck out for me during what you just said was that it seemed to me like the Shaw family, and then ultimately when you became president, but there was a philosophy of servant leadership. And for those people who may not know what that is, that basically is leading from a position of making sure others are growing, making sure others are taken care of. You're protecting. You mentioned the word protector. And servant leadership, meaning a leader that serves others so that they can be more successful, not so that the light is shone directly on the CEO or the president or the leadership team. Was there an element, and you don't have to go in a lot of detail, but was there an element of faith-based leadership? And the reason why I asked this, Peter, is a few weeks ago, I interviewed a gentleman down in Michigan in the United States, and he runs C12 Ministries. And he basically supports business owners, CEOs, leaders in companies who want to bring a faith-based approach to their companies and put that in their philosophy and in the culture of the company, and how it really does help. And he doesn't mean like they're having, Bible study every morning before work, but he's just saying there's a particular culture, environment, and leadership style for a faith-based company. Did you find that the Shaw family and then ultimately yourself kind of operated that way, but not being pushy about it?
It is. And then I think so, yes. I mean, the faith-based values are similar to family values.
Sure.
And even if you look at, we had a very diverse working group. We had in Vancouver, for instance, we had Chinese, we had people from Asia. We had, so we had various faiths, whether it was Buddhism or Hinduism or Catholicism or Christianity. So, but the values, I have a notepad on my desk that has 356 thoughts for the morning, and they were written by a Buddhist. Yeah. And my God, when I read them, I go, these are all just kind of common sense approaches. Again, that's taking care of each other, be inspirational, and JR was an inspirational founder and leader. And I found that to the extent that you could model yourself in a way that was consistently that way, we have people right now. I love LinkedIn because I see people that used to work for Shaw that have gone on to bigger and better things, and I love to acknowledge them publicly in that sort of form of media for what they are doing, because that culture that we kind of built is important to Shaw is now permeating all sorts of companies throughout the world, frankly. And so and these are some of those folks, are people that I mentored, and then they're now mentoring people, and they're exhibiting the same kind of behaviors, and it kind of flows and consistent with, I'll call it, kind of global faith-based kind of values.
Yeah, and I think it works. And like I said, it doesn't mean that you're pushing your religion on people, but you're leading from a standpoint of just being a good person and just having those, like you said, family values, really
Yeah.
treating others as if they were part of your family. And I want to go back to the culture of companies and something, and really what is the basis of even our effort over results philosophy is you want to praise people for the hard work they put in, the effort that they put into something, not just the end result. Because when you focus solely on the result, and if the result isn't what was expected, or maybe the team lost the game, or the company didn't get the big project completed, when you completely disregard all the work that went into trying to achieve the result, people become dejected. They become, they turn inward, and they don't really want to be innovative or creative, and they don't really want to try much harder. And so we preach that, recognize the result, but really reward and praise the effort that went into it. And I think that's what people want. That's the environment they want, is to feel like they're being recognized for the hard work they put in, not just the fact they won a game or completed a project or hit the revenue target for the month, right?
Yeah, that's living life in the reality of, I mean, we were, as Shaw, we were a publicly traded company. And so every quarter there was obviously the shareholders are looking for
Sure.
results, et cetera. But what we used to see, I mean, I think about the effort that we had to go through, for instance, when Rogers bought Shaw, and we all, and the government was, the Competition Bureau was actually trying to stop that.
Yeah.
When I look at the effort that was put into arguing the merits of this change in ownership, and how long hours. I mean, I think about our legal group working with the regulatory group, and the long hours that they had just trying to understand and present a picture, if you will, of what it really would look like, as opposed to having somebody saying, this could be unfairly competitive, which we argued it wasn't. When I look at how much effort went into building networks, et cetera, when we were trying to scale our customers, the experience that they had, the effort that went into that, and then how that was recognized by the company. We had compensation plans that changed from in '89. Compensation was pretty simple, straightforward. But after, when we started looking at compensation-based reward systems and those kinds of systems, and keeping them, whenever you deal with compensation, it's such a personal kind of, it's a personal kind of gesture, and you want to make sure also that fairness. I have a fairness meter, and I used to go through all of the compensation for every employee in our company or every group of employees, and I would say, is this fair? What do we need to do to make sure that when that person receives this, they see it as being fair and equitable, and also that encourages them to continue to provide the same kind of effort and to provide the same kind of way of being, if you will. So fairness meters and encouraging people to look at things from a perspective of fairness. And
Mm.
if you do that, everybody wins. I mean, even when we're negotiating, we didn't have many unions at Shaw, but when we did, I was involved in labor negotiations. The objective was not to dominate and to beat up. The objective was to, essentially to embrace and to go forward, with, even though we might have had different leadership people, like you might have a union leading a group, but if there's, to the extent that they can start sharing the same visions we have, and also acknowledge that they're being treated fairly, that's an example. That's an example of, wow, do I really need to be looking to somebody else for my compensation on that when I'm being treated fairly? And
Yep.
there are people in there that are wise enough to do that.
Well, I've simplified this maybe too much, but I've simplified it this way when it comes to, HR and valuing your people. Because I've worked with hundreds of business owners and CEOs in my past 20 years as a business advisor and coach, and I kept hearing from people, from owners, we have a lot of turnover here, but it's because they went down the street for another dollar an hour. And I just sat back and I'm like, they didn't go down the street for another dollar an hour. They went down the street because of poor leadership. Like they even say, like, people don't leave bad jobs, they leave bad leaders, right? And the three things that your employees ultimately want, and once again, simplifying this, is they want to like who they work for. So that's the owners, the leadership team. They want to know the leadership team has their back and that they're valuing them as an employee. So they want to like who they work for. They want to like who they work with. And that's what I mean is like the people in their department that they rub shoulders with every day. And they want to have a sense of purpose in what they do. Okay. Their actual job itself. And
Yeah.
if people have two of the, and this is all wages aside, because you're assuming you're getting paid a fair wage, but if you have two of the three, you're not going anywhere. If
Hmm.
I love my bosses, maybe I don't like the guy that's next to me, but I love what I do and I love my bosses. I can work through the guy working next to me. If I love the people I work with, like say in a construction site, when you got a team and you love those people and you love in what you do, the bosses are kind of a jerk, but whatever, I can deal with. Like once again, two out of the three, they're probably not going anywhere. And if you provide three out of three, you've got a loyal employee for life. And this is what bothers me, Peter, when these boomer, and I realize they're retiring now and retired out, but boomer and Gen X owners that keep saying there's a Gen Z problem. Sorry, there is no Gen Z problem. You're the problem. It's your antiquated old school notions of how to lead people and how to grow people. Gen Z has finally called bullshit on it. And they basically have said, listen, we're not putting up with this anymore. And that's what I love about your story about Shaw, is that the origins of Shaw, and this goes back to 66 with Capital Group, but leading into Shaw in the 80s, it sounds like they kind of got ahead of the game. And I loved hearing that about that. Do you agree with that sort of summary?
No, absolutely. We prided ourselves in that. Our
Yeah.
turnover, employee turnover, was probably the lowest within the industry, and it, because consistency was another kind of leadership quality. Consistency of leadership, where people can actually know that when you come in the morning, we're not going to see some pouty old leader or somebody's pissed off if something's happened at home. One of the things that I consciously made sure I did was I was consistent, irrespective of what was happening in my personal life or any other part of my life, or what was happening, or some of the stresses that might be occurring. Consistently looking at how, first of all, active listening and your demeanor. There was no hot and then cold and hot and cold. People loved to have to know that they could walk into Peter Bissonnette's office or any one of the leaders within his group, and they would be acknowledged, listened to. They would be given the respect and time that was necessary in order to deal with whatever the issues we were dealing with. That we cared enough to come out and see them. I mean, we were road warriors. I used to love flying to all of the different systems and meeting with staff, and of course, I had been involved in from the ground up in technology and that, so you could actually communicate with employees on speaking the same language, whether you were a technical person, whether you talk to an accounting person. I used to be a computer programmer, so I could talk to IT people and so that really kind of drew them in to like, wow, they actually know what we're doing here. They know what my role is, and they appreciate the role of the contributions that I'm making to the company. I was raised in the 1965. We had disciplinary in the Air Force. There were people that were trying to break us. Now, there was a different kind of raison d'etre for that. They wanted to break us to see whether or not that we could sustain ourselves in warlike conditions. But that's not the way of today. You don't bring people in their office and say, "What the heck?" Anyway, that doesn't work. It hasn't worked for a long time. Even in
Yeah.
the military, I was an honorary captain in the Navy, and what I saw, because the military have a real problem in terms of encouraging and attracting people to come and work on the ships and in the armies, etc., because of the low pay and because of it was kind of esprit de corps. So, so one of the roles that I had as an honorary captain was to try to link the civilian world to the understanding the military and to see it as it really is now. They are like little mini businesses, and they work come around, they work on ways that people could feel really good about being on a ship for 6 months without seeing their loved ones, and all of the things that safety nets that they can create for them. The fact that they care enough to have outreaches for, or if there's some, looking for healthy kind of behaviors. And it's similarly in our company, we were all advocates for each other. So if you could see somebody wasn't quite on their game, you would actually reach out to them and say, "Are you okay today? Is everything okay?" And my gosh, sometimes all of a sudden the tears would start flowing. You go, "Oh my gosh." There was a sort of cathartic kind of caring leadership that is that way. And that's not to say that we didn't have tough decisions to make, and we had we had challenges to meet, but we actually tried to do it with everybody in mind. Everybody was a part of the solution, and so having that solution-based kind of team approach to things really enforce, not the word is not enforced, but really manifest the way that our company are. And people go, "Wow, I don't want to leave and go to this other company, even though they're offering me more money or whatever it is. There's something very unique about this company. As I said, the secret sauce of Shaw, we used to call it. And the understanding for leadership that is the way of the world. The way of the world is all of those values that we said are our values, actually living them. And caring was the biggest, for me, underpinned all of the other values, whether it's accountability, customer focus. If you care enough about your employees or your customers, all those other things take care of themselves. You'll do your best to be on time. You'll do your best when you answer. The tone of service that you deal with customers on.
I love what you said about consistency earlier, because I think that's not only just in the workplace. I think our children, for us as parents, they want to see their parents be consistent. Our coaches on the athletic field, as an athlete, I wanted my coaches to be consistent in their approach and how they handle things daily. Our teachers in a classroom, when kids show up into a classroom, they want to know that their teachers are prepared and that there's a consistent level of, let's say, praise and punishment, so to speak, in a classroom. Consistency is key. I want to talk about the book, because what you've said today, a lot of it is obviously in the book, and the book is called Count on Me. It's one of the things that I took from the summary of the book is that it mentions that you felt like you were told you'd never amount to anything. And that, in speaking to you today, Peter, I don't get that sense that you have this drive that you had to prove yourself and prove to other people that watch, I'm going to be, great. Like, you come across very humble and straightforward, and like, you know what, I just put my effort in, I put the work in, and my success really is just a result of that. But I don't brag about it. I don't have an ego. But where did that you'd never amount to anything, where did that come from? And did that drive you even subconsciously?
Well, the working title of the book was Believe in Yourself. So as it was being written by Lucy and myself, that was kind of an overarching theme. But when I was a young boy, my mom, she had 7 children, and I was the middle. And there was something she was going through, I have to call it postpartum. Anyway, she used to occasionally put me into a closet and just basically confine me in a closet. And she would say, she didn't have the faith in me. I didn't learn to read as fast as my brother. I had a very brilliant brother, and I was more athletically inclined. She's referred to me as a bit of a meathead. You'll never amount to anything. And those are strong words coming from mother when you're 4 years old. I went to boarding school in England for 5 years before the monastery, and I used to enjoy being in the boarding school environment where you could stand for yourself, be yourself. And the people, the teachers of the time, these were Augustinian monks, as much as they were tough, they also were trying to help to develop you. And that you talk about baby boomer kind of discipline, these Augustinian monks, they were tough. And you'll read that in the book where I got beat up a few times. But my mom's words, your mother's words, are really important. And they form they form the way you are, frankly.
Well, your self-worth. Yeah, it defines your self-worth.
When I was in the closet, I would say, I'd be rocking it, but why am I in here? I believe in myself. I was scared too. I had claustrophobia, and it was an appropriate punishment if you're trying to make a point, but it was kind of a consistent message that you'll never make anything yourself. You were in the seminary and you left. You were in the Air Force and you left. But I wasn't leaving because I wasn't happy doing it. I was leaving because I had my goals were not being fulfilled in those particular environments. But I was gracious and I had gratitude for having the experience. I mean, how many people get to work on airplanes, like jet planes and Hercules? And I always felt blessed for the blessings I had, and I still do. I mean, when I think of my career, my blessings come from the relationships that we were able to make, the friends that we have from those, the memories, the joint kind of successes that we experienced. There's I mean, I had a heart attack in 2008, and you talk about effort over results. That was kind of a warning bell for me in terms of balance in life. But there's the gratitude to having met like J.R. Shaw. I mean, he was a phenomenal person. Jim Shaw, I was with him when he passed, and at J.R.'s request, he knew that I was an integral part of the family. I felt like family. I'm still on the family trust, their board, because they trust me, and they know that my whole raison d'etre at Shaw was to make the Shaws and the Shaw family and the company successful. It wasn't about me becoming the CEO, which I wasn't. I was a president. I felt blessed that I was a president of a company named Shaw with a Bissonnette name. That that it was that they trusted me to be an integral part of a family, and to build upon that, and to feel requited from and grateful for being a part of this family and a part of this adventure. And it was an adventure. And the book. Oh, here's the book, by the way. The book Count on Me talked about that, and I thought it was such a diverse kind of career path with so many learnings that young people. I wanted to talk at schools. I'd love to go to schools and talk about these values and how important they are. There's nothing magic about the way the impact that you can have through being a certain way. Like if you want to be a prick, you can be one. That, and most people will recognize that. The nice thing is, if you are that way, that if somebody can say to you, maybe it's to think about maybe taking a different approach to this, to get a little sandpaper in there, to maybe smooth the edges, and help people to be successful, because we are all different. And I used to love that. That, to me, as I said, if you can find and look for the good in people, wow, and then focus on that and making and kind of expanding upon that, and giving people confidence, and giving people drive to succeed, and the drive to contribute, great things can happen.
In the book, you talk about whole person leadership, and one of the best leadership books I've read in the last 5 years was Kevin Lawrence's Your Oxygen Mask First. And he speaks to be a good leader, we need to take care of ourselves first. So the leader, and that's not meant to be selfish. It means, have a side of your life that is not work-based, right? It means taking care of yourself from a physical, mental, and spiritual perspective. Be a whole person, and not just immerse yourself in the role of president, CEO, leader 24/7 and always be on. Sometimes you need to shut that off, take breaks, take time away, re-energize, because I honestly believe that the best leaders are the ones that do keep themselves in top shape physically, mentally, spiritually, because then they can come to the company and bring that to their people that they're leading. And so you discuss music, family, photography, things that were part of your life while you were being a leader at Shaw. So give me your summary of what being a whole leader is, having whole person leadership.
Yeah. Well, I used to think about it from a triangular point of view, and so we have a left brain and a right brain, and there's a logical brain, there's a creative brain. And so to the extent that you can feed those, and for me, it was through music and photography, and the ultimate objective is to create balance. Because if you are, as you just described, just focused on the work aspect and everything else, you're going to get burned out so quickly. You have to have outlets, and family and your relationships with family all benefit from the other activities that you're involved with. And you talked about faith-based. In the triangle that I used to look at, there was a faith-based, there was a business kind of logical base, and there was a creative-based element to our makeup. And for me, music was that, photography was that. I was definitely in my bottom part of the triangle was business focus and those types of things. But then there was a faith-based side of it as well. I mean, I believe in God. If you look at my book, we talk about angels that are interceding for us. I don't know who they are, but somehow some people call it providence. I call it gentle nudges from angels, somebody who cares. There is that other element in our world. And to the extent that it helped color me in terms of the way that I looked at the world, and that I was able to, and I absolutely agree with you on the physical side. Mm-hmm. I mean, I make sure that I do my 2.5 mile walk every day, and I do things or play golf. I used to play hockey. I was a competitive karate person. Mm-hmm. That's also learning how to kind of exist in a different environment too. But I played hockey, and I've had 6 shoulder operations.
You got me beat by one.
I was passionate about it. Yeah, and those creative, you had to ask, do I really want to be doing this? But I could not. I played baseball for 20 years. So those were working on a team in a very different environment. But the same, when I was in my band, we played the Millennial New Year's Eve at a gig in Kelowna, a brand new Coliseum. And in July, I was asked we had just released an album called Magical Lady, and we were trying to raise money for lymphoma research with the proceeds from our band. So Jim Shaw, being the way he is, he said, Peter, every new employee that's going to come to work for Shaw, we're going to give them your album, the Magical Lady album. We played this gig in Kelowna, and I treated it like a business project to the band. I said, first of all, are we all in to do this? So whatever we need to do, learn 50 songs, and in those days they were alternative rock and country and blues. So we learned 50 songs. We all agreed on what they would be. We practiced every night. And then on December 30th, we drove from Calgary to Kelowna, and we had the time of our lives. And people, all of the funding went to the lymphoma research. But the joy that we took from doing something, seeing it, and then actually making it come to fruition, and putting all of our collective kind of energy and talents on stage as a headliner band was the rock and roll moment. But to me, it was no different than any other business endeavor. You plan for it, you see it, you practice it, and you commit to it.
There you go.
And so these people, they're going, well, you're the president of Shaw, but you're in our band here. We used to play for our Christmas concert so people could see that we are human. We have the same kind of loves for things and the same kind of reaction to things that make us happy, make us smile, have a sense of humor, take things, put them into context. Yeah, I used to say when people were starting to overcompensate, I said, do you realize there are 700 million people in China don't even know we exist? So let's put that in perspective.
Yeah.
And enjoy it, celebrate it, but we did constantly. We never did a lot of overly indulgent things, but we had our moments of celebration, and we moved on. Maybe it's like if you win a game, the next game is the next objective. So those balancing and having those parts of the triangle as our makeup, I think, are really important, and it attracts people. People, they have other reasons other than work to be attracted. They have common interests. I mean, I would never have known these guys that were musicians. They were all in a band, and we had the same. They had lives, and we had lives. And we had families, but we shared it on a totally different level than what we would share it at work. And I trusted them so that I could be myself as a leader at work without being compromised by anything I was involved with them on music. So it was for me, it was a great outlet.
That's beautiful, and I love seeing when leaders have, and I don't like using the term work-life balance because I think it's been overused now, but I like when I see leaders have that work-life balance where they're very committed to their work, but they also know when to turn that off and spend time with their family and spend time with a hobby, whether it be music or going to the gym or golf or what have you. And I like seeing that in leaders because I think it's really important for leaders to have balance in their lives and not have that imposter syndrome where they're constantly going 24/7 trying to prove themselves to others. Um, let's start to turn the corner and wrap things up here, Peter. In your 2+ decades at Shaw, going back to '89, but especially when you're in your leadership years, I want you to take two paths here. I want you to talk about one of the things you're most proud of in your time at Shaw in the president's role. And then I also want you to take a look at something you look back on and go, man, I wish I would have done that differently. Something that it doesn't have to be a single decision necessarily, but an approach, because the way I approach life now with this effort over results philosophy has transformed me as a father, as a business person, as a coach to young kids, and so forth. I love what that's done for me, and it took me 50 years to figure it out. What are those two things? What are you most proud of coming out of your leadership time at Shaw, and what's one thing you maybe would go back and change?
Well, Quinn, that's beautiful kind of summary kind of questions, because on the Shaw side, the things I'm most proud of, it's really, I call it a legacy. I have a legacy. I have a reputation, and the reputation came from being a certain way and being a leader that people trusted, being a leader that cared about both the company, the destiny of the company, and about the good health, if you will, of the employees that we led, being proud of the accomplishments that we had, even though you don't look at things always as the results. We did have actually some darn good results in terms of creating a company. The sad part of that whole thing, of course, was that it got, the world changed around us in terms of our capability to move into the next century. And as a family, the family decided that it was time for us to have somebody else look after the next phase of our company. So Rogers bought us, and they bought us for as a shareholder when the price of the stock was at 20, and Rogers bought it for 41.50. It was a win-win for the shareholders. It was with regret that we had to sell. But what I feel most proud about is that Rogers now has all of those employees that were working for Shaw and had a way of doing certain things. Those are going to really help Rogers, who also have the same aspirations. That there's a legacy company that was within the Rogers company that will continue to do will continue to be the way that they were when they were the Shaw, and which is a wonderful way. So that's basically, it's about a legacy that we have left, and it's a legacy. The regrets are, I have a regret for one of my sons that we don't have a relationship. I remember, and this goes to communications, I remember as a brash young person working at BC Tel once sending out an email. And I sent the email out because I was upset about something that somebody had done to our data center. And had I followed my advice today, I would have slept on it. I would have not sent it out. I would have modified it so that it didn't have the effect that it did have on the person who's the recipient. And it was a lesson I learned a long time ago about when you write or when you're sending out a message, to do it in a way that you think about what you're writing, that you're thinking about the consequences of what you're writing, and you think about the implications and the effect on the person who's reading it. So there's many ways to express yourself, and there's ways to express disappointment in a much more enlightened way. And so that, to me, was the lesson learned as a young, brash person that has served me very, very well over my years. As you can well imagine, I've written a lot of notes in my years. But it was a very simple lesson that we could all learn from: is do not send out notices that you would regret sending out because of the impact it has. But the legacy is my proud moment, and that would be a moment that we learn from it.
I appreciate that you talked about a regret, and you'd mentioned a couple. And what I like is that a lot of people will say, I have no regrets. I did what I did. It is what it is. I have to take the good and the bad of what my decisions in earlier life. But I think it's important for people, if you don't want to use the term regret, that's fine. But I think it's important for people to look back and learn from mistakes that they've made. And that's really what a growth mindset is. You spoke to, estrangement from your son. I know, like, my brother and I, we basically disowned each other for 7 years. We've come back together again because we never know where our paths are going to take us. We never know how the world is going to change how we see things. And so to be able to, admit those, what you called regrets, it's very powerful. And thank you for being a vulnerable leader that way. I think that's important for leaders to do that, to be vulnerable and be real. So let's wrap things up here completely. I'm going to ask you a couple questions just to wind things down. Obviously, let's go back to the entire path here from once again, from the Benedictine monastery to being in the military to, tech, to BC Tel, to Shaw. What is Peter Bissonnette today? What are you most proud of today? Obviously, the book just came out, Count on Me. We're going to promote that in a second. But what are you most proud of today, and what keeps you busy today out in Kelowna, BC?
Well, my family. Yesterday, I was out in the lake with my wife and her parents and guests from Palm Springs out on the lake. And it was actually very calm when we left. I couldn't even park my boat into the lift because it was so rough out there. And I'm the captain of this vessel. And it was actually a mini little lesson in patience. You can't control Mother Nature. Just wait for Mother Nature to take a deep breath and then come back when it's appropriate. Don't do things irrationally. I play golf. I walk every day. I go for a 2.5 mile walk every day. I have a loving wife, Tracy Bell, her parents. I have 2 little wiener dogs, Winnie and Frankie. I have a recording studio, so I create music.
Right, I heard that.
And I love music. In fact, in my audio book, which I actually narrated myself, and I just finished that last week, I'm going to put a couple of my SoundCloud songs between paragraphs in there to share some of I call the other essence, if you will, of the experiences that I've really been blessed to have, experience with it, music being one of them. We live here in Kelowna during the summer. We live in Calgary as well, and we used to live in California. We're selling our house there, and we're going to look for something that
Everyone who has property in the States is selling it off.
Well, we are. It's all about values and integrity. So anyway, we're find somewhere else warm to go in the winter. But I feel blessed. Every night I say my dear God, thank you for all of our blessings, because I truly feel blessed. And I feel blessed for all of the people that I talk about in my book. This was something. I'm a product, if you will, of the energies of all the people around me. And so I'm blessed for that.
So let's finalize this here. I always ask my guests, where can people find you on social media, maybe on LinkedIn? Do you have a website? Like, how can we help you promote the book? Count on me. Let's get your socials and your promotions out there and let people know where they can find you.
Well, my book is available on Amazon.com as of the 18th. So you can find.
Nice.
Here is the book, by the way. It's Count on Me. And I'm on LinkedIn, Peter Bissonnette. I'm on Instagram, Peter Bissonnette. And I'm on Facebook. I might be on TikTok, but that depends on what I'm going to do with my time as well in terms of podcasts. And I'm actually creating a website right now so that I can take kind of more of the essence of some of my photography. And that, it's going to be a pjbmusic@shaw.ca is my email if anybody wants to reach out to me. And I have had many, many encouraging notes from people that have essentially blessed the effort that we've put into, and of course, Lucy Linsky, who was the co-writer with me on this collaborative process. I haven't seen her once in person since we started this, but we've been able to find a way of expressing my life in first person and be true to the values that are important to me and were important to me in terms of my life.
Well, Peter, your story shows how empathy, lifelong learning, creative curiosity really fuels transformative leadership and that servant leadership that you project. Thanks for joining us today. Congrats on Count on Me. Listeners, you can look for it on Amazon, like Peter said. And until next episode, I'm your host, Quinn Magnuson, and thank you for joining us on the EOR podcast.
Thanks. God bless.
Just hit record or not record.